was the kind of cold that made bones ache. Wind swept across the snow-covered main street of Ash Hollow, a forgotten town nestled deep in the Wyoming territory. The winter had arrived too early that year, and the harvest too late. Folks were starving, fires burning low, hope running thin. In the corner of the town's half-collapsed church lived a man named Caleb Rourke, tall, lean, and quiet. People whispered that he was a drifter, maybe an ex-soldier, maybe a criminal, maybe worse. But no one ever asked because Caleb didn't speak unless he had to. And when he did, his voice carried the weight of something buried deep. Loss, maybe. Regret, definitely. He survived by chopping wood, hauling water, and patching fences. Folks paid him in bread, beans, or sometimes nothing at all. He never complained. He never asked for more. He just nodded and moved on. And in a town where everyone had less than nothing, Caleb had less than that. It was the second Sunday of December when the town gathered for the relief auction. The banker, Mr. Thorne, had called it after half the community defaulted on their land payments. What was left of decency was being sold off. Oxen, furniture, winter coats, even family heirlooms. And people bought them because survival had no room for sentiment. But no one expected what came next. Sheriff Gideon Marks stepped onto the auction block, flanked by 2 deputies. Between them stood a young woman, no more than 25, with dirt on her cheeks and fear in her eyes. Her coat barely covered her pregnant belly. Behind her stood a boy, maybe 6 years old, clutching her skirt, his lip bleeding, eyes hard from hunger. Sheriff cleared his throat. This here's June Whitlow and her boy, Eli. Husband died in a mining collapse last month. No kin, no land, and no way to get through winter. Judge ruled her debt unresolved. The county can't feed 2 mouths that don't work. Silence. Then, she's being put up for indenture, the sheriff added. 3 years service. The boy too. Terms negotiable. Someone in the back spat. A woman gasped, but no one said a word to stop it. Starting at $10, Thorne barked. She's strong, healthy, and educated. The boy's quiet and obedient. The first bid came from a rancher. 10. Then a merchant. 15. Caleb stood behind the crowd, arms folded, heart pounding in his chest like a war drum. He didn't know her, didn't owe her, didn't have 10 cents to his name. But her eyes, her terrified, defiant eyes, looked into the crowd like she was searching for mercy. Not charity, mercy. He stepped forward. 20. Heads turned. The town drunk blinked. Thorne frowned. Rourke, you got $20? No, Caleb said quietly. He pulled from his coat a pocket watch, rusted, worn, and old. But this was my father's. Civil War cavalry, solid silver. You know what it's worth. Thorne scowled, examined it, nodded. Fine, sold. June didn't speak as Caleb led her and the boy back through the snow. She didn't thank him, didn't cry, just walked beside him like a ghost. That night, he gave them his bed in the church, took the floor himself, shared the last of his stew and left the fire burning low. The boy, Eli, watched him silently. At dawn, June spoke. Why? Caleb didn't look up. Figured someone worse would take you. You didn't have to. I didn't want to watch you freeze. Her voice broke then, just slightly. You don't know me. No, but I know what it's like to lose everything. She looked at him for a long time and said nothing more. Days turned to weeks. Caleb chopped wood by day. At night, he taught Eli how to tie knots, how to mend boots, how to make a snare. June cleaned the chapel, patched Caleb's torn shirts, and sat up late staring into the fire. No one else came to visit, no one offered help. But slowly, something began to shift. June laughed once. Eli smiled twice. Caleb started humming old songs under his breath. And just as the snow began to thaw in late March, tragedy struck again. The wind returned that night, hard, dry, angry. It came rolling down from the mountains and swept through Ash Hollow like a warning. Caleb didn't sleep well. He hadn't for days. June had been coughing, dry and hacking, something deep in her chest. Eli tried not to show it, but the boy was scared. Caleb knew the sound of sickness. It had taken his mother, then his sister, then everyone else worth losing. But this wind, it brought something worse. Just before dawn, a scream tore through the street. Fire. Caleb burst from the church barefoot, coat in one hand, rifle in the other. Flames were already ripping through the barn behind the general store. Horses screamed. Someone shouted for water. Buckets were passed, but the snow was dry and thin. Too little ice, too little time. Then the flames jumped. The old bakery's roof, dry as hay, caught like paper. Sparks flew down the alley. And the church, Caleb's shelter, their only home, lit like a candle. He ran toward it as June stumbled out with Eli in her arms. Her face was streaked with soot. Her hair was half burnt. Eli was coughing, eyes wide, barefoot in the snow. June collapsed into Caleb's arms, gasping. "The back room, there's my bag, papers, letters, my wedding ring." "Forget it," Caleb said. But she shook her head. "I can't." And before anyone could stop him, Caleb ran into the fire. The smoke was thick. Heat blistered his skin as he forced the back door open. He covered his mouth, dropped low, and found the leather bag, scorched but intact, beneath the small cot. The wooden frame collapsed just as he grabbed it. He barely made it out. His coat was smoking, eyebrows gone, and one hand raw with burns. The townsfolk cheered faintly, more out of shock than support. But June, she just stared at him. And in that moment, something broke in her. She stepped forward, took his hand, his burned, blistered hand, and pressed it to her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice ragged. They moved into the back of the old livery stable after that. Caleb built walls from scrap and patched the roof with whatever tarps he could find. It wasn't warm, but it was dry. June nursed his wounds with boiled cloth and honey. Eli slept curled at his feet like a pup. The townsfolk offered little. A sack of flour here, a bucket of milk there, but most just avoided them. Except one man, Reverend Amos Fielding, a kind-faced preacher who'd lost his wife years before. He came one evening holding a tin of beans and a tired smile. "You saved lives," he told Caleb. "Doesn't go unnoticed." "I didn't do it to be noticed." Amos nodded. "That's why it matters." Spring came slow, wet, and uncertain. Caleb's hand healed, though the scars would stay. June's belly grew rounder, and the baby kicked often. She laughed more now, full-bodied, beautiful. She told stories of her husband, Thomas, and how he'd built her a cradle before Eli was born. Caleb listened, but never spoke of his own past. Until one night, under the stars, he finally said, "I had a wife once." June turned to him gently. "What happened?" He hesitated. "I left for the war, came back late, too late." She said nothing, but she slid her hand into his. And they stayed like that, under the Wyoming sky, two broken people finding pieces of each other. One morning in mid-April, a stranger rode into town. He was clean, well-dressed, and rode a tall, black gelding with polished tack. His name was Silas Hartman, and he introduced himself with a silver smile. "I'm here on behalf of Hartman Rail and Timber," he said to Sheriff Marks. "Looking to buy land, big project, expansion westward. Your valley's prime real estate." Everyone listened. Money, jobs, new roads, new hope. But Caleb's heart sank. He knew men like Silas. They didn't build, they took. And when Silas's eyes fell on June, they lingered too long. "She's not for sale," Caleb said coldly. Silas smirked, didn't say she was. But he didn't have to. That night, Caleb made his decision. He started clearing the land behind the stable, digging post holes, hauling stone, building, quietly, with aching hands and determination in his jaw. June asked him once, "What are you doing?" He smiled. "Building you a home, something no one can take." But as the walls rose, so did the tension. Silas offered gold for the chapel ruins, for the creek, for the stable. He offered double for June's indenture rights, and when Caleb refused, Silas laughed. "You're a nobody with nothing," he sneered. "Why keep fighting?" Caleb stood tall, scarred hand clenched. "Because some things ain't for sale." Then, in the final week of spring, June went into labor. The baby came hard and fast. Eli waited outside, clutching Caleb's coat. June screamed through the night. Blood soaked the sheets. Reverend Amos helped, but they had no medicine, no clean tools. Caleb never left her side. When the baby came, a girl, small but strong, June cried with joy, and then collapsed. Her pulse faltered. Her skin went cold. "Stay with me," Caleb begged, pressing her hand to his cheek like she had months ago. "Please." June blinked slowly. "Don't let her grow up alone," she whispered. "You're not leaving," he whispered back. But by sunrise, June was gone. Caleb buried her behind the chapel ruins, beneath a cross he carved himself. The town came. Even those who had once looked away. No one spoke much. Eli stood beside him holding his baby sister. Caleb looked at them both, his hands shaking, and made a vow. "You're mine now, both of you. I don't care what the papers say. I don't care what anyone says. I'll raise you. I'll protect you. I'll make sure she knows her mother's name." As the town turned to go, a carriage rolled in. It was black, sleek, and marked with the crest of the Hartman Company. Silas stepped out and said loudly, "You're trespassing now, Rourke. That land's been bought. Eviction's final. Get off it by sundown." Caleb looked him dead in the eyes and didn't move. Caleb didn't move. Silas Hartman stood smugly in the road, arms folded over his expensive coat, boots polished so bright they didn't belong anywhere near the dirt of Ash Hollow. Behind him, 2 hired guns flanked the carriage, long coats, cold eyes, pistols resting on their hips like sleeping dogs. "I said you've got till sundown," Silas repeated. Caleb adjusted the baby in his arms. Her name was Clara. June had chosen it before she passed. She was barely a week old, wrapped in an old flannel shirt, asleep against his chest. Eli stood behind him, holding a hammer. Caleb met Silas's eyes, voice calm but final. "This land was abandoned. I rebuilt it with my own hands. You want it, you come and take it." The hired gun stiffened, but Silas only smiled. "Careful now, Mr. Rourke. You're not the only man with nothing left to lose." Word spread fast. By dusk, half the town had gathered quietly on the edge of the stable grounds. No one said it aloud, but they were waiting for a fight, for a tragedy, for justice. Maybe all three. Sheriff Marks arrived late, his coat dusted with road. He walked up to Caleb, his face tight with conflict. "You're in a bad spot, son." Caleb looked him over. "That a warning?" "It's the law. Hartman's got signed papers. Bank says it's legal. So was selling June at auction. You gonna stand behind that too?" The sheriff sighed. "I didn't like it then, and I don't like this now. But liking don't change the facts. Neither does fear." Marks hesitated, then glanced down at Clara in Caleb's arms. "The sheriff's voice softened. "You can still walk away. No shame in that." Caleb shook his head. That baby's got nowhere else to go. Eli either. I buried their mother right over that hill. I ain't leaving them. Not for him. The sheriff swallowed hard. Then I hope you're ready. I've been ready since the war. Night fell. Caleb didn't sleep. He stood on the porch of the half-built house, rifle beside him, Clara wrapped against his chest, Eli curled under a blanket at his feet. Inside the stable, Amos Fielding knelt in prayer. A few townsfolk had trickled in, quiet, uneasy. But they stayed. Mrs. Dunn from the boarding house brought bread. A widower named Harv loaned his shotgun. Even the blacksmith, Old Red, showed up with a bucket of nails and a glare aimed toward the hills. They weren't there to fight. Not really, but they were tired of being stepped on. At dawn, Silas returned. He brought 6 men. Caleb stood in the center of the yard, coat open, rifle cradled in one arm, baby still asleep against his chest. Silas dismounted, eyes scanning the scene. "This your idea of a standoff?" He laughed. "A crippled ex-soldier, a kid, and a preacher?" Caleb didn't smile. "I'm not asking you to leave, I'm telling you." One of the gunmen stepped forward, hand on his pistol. But something stopped him. A sound. Boots, dozens of them. From the church road, down from the fields, through the side streets, the town was coming. Not just men, women, old folks, even children. Not armed, not violent, just present. They stood behind Caleb like a wall of quiet defiance. Silas's smirk faded. "You think they're gonna die for you?" He spat. Caleb didn't flinch. "No, but I think they're ready to stop dying for you." The sheriff stepped forward, his badge catching the morning light. "I looked over your paperwork, Silas. You bought a lot of things, but you didn't buy this land. You bought a claim on it, and a claim don't hold when someone's living on it, building on it, raising children on it." Silas turned red. "That's theft." "No," the sheriff said slowly. "That's homesteading." He held out a folded document. "I filed it myself, on Caleb's behalf. Witnessed by half the town. This land's his now, legal and proper." "You son of a—" "Careful," the sheriff warned, placing a hand on his own gun. Silas looked around. His men shifted, unsure. The people didn't move, just stood, quiet and unmoving. He realized then, this town wasn't afraid of him anymore. Silas Hartman turned, climbed into his carriage and rode out without a word. That night, the town lit a fire behind the chapel ruins. There was stew, bread, and even a fiddle or two. Amos called it a Thanksgiving, though it wasn't any holiday. Caleb stood back, watching. Clara was in Mrs. Dunn's arms, sleeping peacefully. Eli was laughing for the first time in weeks, running between the adults like he finally remembered he was a child. Amos approached him quietly. "You saved more than just those kids, son. You reminded us who we are." Caleb shook his head. "I didn't do anything special." "You stood up. That's more than most." Later, under the stars, Caleb sat beside the grave where June rested. He placed a carved piece of wood beside the cross. It read, "June Whitlow, mother, wife, fighter." He sat there a long time. When Eli finally came to fetch him, he looked up and said, "She'd be proud, wouldn't she?" Eli nodded. "She told me you were the bravest man she ever met." Caleb swallowed the lump in his throat. "I'm not brave, just stubborn." "But you stayed," Eli whispered. Caleb looked at him and smiled. Weeks passed. The town settled. Spring gave way to summer. Grass grew tall around the chapel hill. The roof Caleb built held firm against the rains. Ash Hollow changed in small but steady ways. The townsfolk smiled more. Doors stayed open longer. Neighbors helped without asking. It was like something heavy had been lifted from everyone's shoulders, and they all knew it started the day one man said no to the wrong kind of power. Caleb still lived simply. He rose before dawn, tended to the animals, rebuilt the rest of the chapel with Reverend Amos, and worked long hours in the blacksmith's shed when Red let him. His hands remained calloused, scarred from burns and war, but they worked with a new purpose. The baby, Clara, was growing fast, bright-eyed, and always clinging to his shirt with one little fist. And Eli, now 8, had taken to shadowing him, like a second shadow. He called Caleb Pa now. The first time he said it, Caleb couldn't speak for a full minute. One morning in early July, Caleb received a letter. It was left on the stable door, no name, just sealed in wax. The paper was thick. The ink smelled expensive. He opened it with one hand, Clara on his hip. The words inside were simple, but they hit like a hammer. Mr. Rourke, I heard what you did. I saw what Hartman tried to do, and I watched how you stood alone when no one else would. I owe my life to a man like you once. Consider this a small debt repaid. At the bottom was a name he didn't recognize, John T. Everston, but beneath it was a line of land coordinates and a stamped deed. 1,000 acres. Along the river, fertile, unclaimed, legally signed over, and a note attached to it. Build something that matters. I trust you know how. Caleb stared at the letter for a long time. Then he sat down hard on the porch. 1,000 acres. Enough for cattle, for farming, for homes. Enough for a future. Reverend Amos found him there an hour later. You look like you've seen a ghost. I think I just saw a second chance. That night, Caleb brought the letter to the town hall. Folks gathered, slow, curious. He read it aloud. Let the town see the truth with their own eyes. He could have kept it for himself. No one would have blamed him. But when he looked at those tired, hopeful faces, he knew he couldn't. I don't want to own it, he said. I want to share it. A co-op. Land for the people of Ash Hollow. For the kids growing up here. For the families who've had nothing for too long. Are you sure? Amos asked. Caleb nodded. June used to say, it only means something when you pass it on. The next few weeks were like waking up from a long sleep. Families helped each other build. A schoolhouse went up near the river. Red taught Eli how to forge nails. Mrs. Dunn opened a soup kitchen. Even the sheriff planted crops with his own hands. And through it all, Caleb worked harder than anyone. Quiet, focused, never asking for anything. Not praise, not payment, just purpose. One morning, as he loaded fence posts onto a cart, a wagon rolled up the trail, fancier than anything in town. It bore the crest, Everston Freight and Rail. A man stepped out, older, lean, dressed like a banker but with farmer's hands. Mr. Rourke? Caleb nodded slowly. I'm John Everston. They sat beneath the awning of the rebuilt chapel, sharing coffee in battered tin mugs. I fought in the war too, John said, staring out at the wheat fields growing tall. Saved once by a man who gave everything to protect folks who'd never know his name. I promised myself if I ever got the chance, I'd do the same for someone like him. You think that's me? Caleb asked. John smiled. I think you're better. You stood with nothing to gain, no uniform, no command, just your heart. You gave away what others would have sold 10 times over. I just did what I had to. That's exactly the kind of man this world needs more of. Everston pulled out a second envelope. Inside was another deed, but this one in Caleb's name alone. A ranch house, 4 barns, a rail depot, fully built, fully paid. Yours, Everston said. No strings, no expectations. Caleb sat in silence. You earned it, John added softly. Not because you saved anyone, but because you reminded us what a man should be. That night, Caleb sat with Eli and baby Clara beneath the stars. You tired? He asked the boy. Eli yawned. A little. But I don't want to sleep. What if I wake up and it's all gone? Caleb put an arm around him. It won't be. Not this time. We built it right. Can we really stay here forever? Caleb looked down at Clara sleeping in his arms, at the fields stretching to the horizon, at the homes glowing with lantern light across the valley. We're not. Just staying, he said. We're rooting. Years passed. Ash Hollow changed, but not in the ways most towns did. It didn't grow into a city. There were no marble buildings or flashy signs, no factories, no rail barons. What grew here was something quieter, stronger, a community. Families that once barely spoke now lived side by side. Land was shared, not sold. When someone fell ill, someone else brought soup. When a barn caught fire, 6 more hands helped rebuild. When a child cried, a neighbor soothed them like their own. And in the center of it all, without needing to lead, stood Caleb Rourke. By the time Clara turned 5, she was riding bareback through the wheat fields. Eli, now almost 13, worked alongside Red in the forge and read books at night by lantern light. Caleb built them a real house on the riverbank. Nothing fancy, just sturdy walls, warm floors, and a front porch wide enough to watch the sunset together. There was peace, but also purpose. Each morning he rose before dawn and walked the property, same way he did years ago when he had nothing but a hammer and grief. Except now, he carried hope. One day, the post rider brought a letter with a government seal. Caleb opened it, brow furrowed. It was an invitation. To Washington, D.C., he nearly tossed it aside, but Eli snatched it and read the whole thing aloud twice. "You're being honored," Eli whispered, eyes wide. "They want you to speak, about the town, about what you did." "I didn't do anything special." Eli looked at him serious. "That's exactly why you have to go." He traveled east in a borrowed suit with Eli by his side. The capital was overwhelming. Noise, stone, marble halls, men with heavy words and shallow eyes. But Caleb walked through it all the same way he'd walked through fire years before. Head down, heart steady. When he stepped onto the podium in front of a crowd of senators, governors, and generals, he spoke plainly. No polish, no grand words. Just the truth. "I didn't buy a widow and her child at auction because I was brave. I did it because no one else would. I didn't stay and build a town because I had a vision. I stayed because I was tired of running. What came after wasn't luck or favor or magic. It was just good people remembering who they are. Kindness is louder than fear, and it lasts longer." The room fell silent, and then rose in applause. He returned home a week later, riding up the trail just as the sun dipped low over Ash Hollow. The town was waiting, not with banners, not with speeches, just with smiles and the warmth of 100 hands ready to welcome him back. Years turned to decades. Eli took over the forge, built his own home, married the blacksmith's daughter, and had 2 boys of his own. Clara grew wild and free. She taught school under the tree Caleb had planted the day June died. Every child in town learned to read in her voice. Caleb grew old. The limp in his leg never left. His hands stayed scarred, his back bent. But his eyes, those eyes stayed clear, sharp as the morning wind. He sat often on the porch, watching the valley breathe. Watching a town live the way towns were meant to. One morning, as the fog curled over the wheat and the chapel bell rang for no particular reason, Caleb felt something shift, A peace. He closed his eyes and smiled. In that town buried him under the same tree where Clara taught, beside June. No statue, no stone, just a wooden sign that read, Caleb Rourke. He didn't save the West, he just reminded it what it was. Epilogue. The lesson. A writer once visited Ash Hollow, decades later. He came looking for history, heroes, battles, legacies. What he found was a town built on quiet kindness, shared labor, and a man no one had seen in years but everyone still spoke of like he'd only just stepped out for a walk. He asked an old woman, Clara, now gray-haired and smiling, how it all began. She pointed to the field. He bought a pregnant widow and her orphan at auction. What he did next, that's what shocked the whole West. Then she leaned in. But it didn't shock us. Why not? Because deep down, we always knew that's what a good man's supposed to do.